Welcome back to the Ideagen Summit. What an incredible morning to talk about such incredible issues from global leaders and luminaries, especially during this time. Issues like equity and equality, sustainability, empowerment of women and girls, and the 17 global goals of the United Nations from leaders like Mary Milvin, award-winning singer, songwriter, actress, leader, Sharon Price John, CEO of Build-A-Bear, Stacey Howler with her panel with the Bright Focus Foundation, and the launch today of the Linda Ronstadt film, which I think folks will be incredibly inspired by regarding Parkinson's disease. It's an incredible film, and I encourage everyone to see it on HBO Max and on Amazon. It's available today. James Keach, producer, just did a phenomenal job in helping to bring that forward. Mark Fitzgerald and Mike Hayes from KPMG, what an incredibly inspiring interview as well. And we have an incredible afternoon planned as well as we seek to create awareness and ultimately achieve the global goals of the United Nations by 2030. Thank you, and stay tuned for part 2 of day 1.
Hi, I would like to welcome M.R. Rana Swami here to the Global Innovation 2030 Digital Summit. He's a software executive, investor, entrepreneur, corporate eco-strategy expert, community builder, and philanthropist. He is also the co-founder of the Sandhill Group, one of the earliest angel investment firms, and in 2007 founded the Corporate Eco Forum. Welcome, M.R.
Thank you for having me, Cooper.
Yes, we're so honored to have you here. Let me get right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, so I grew up in India, came to the United States when I was 21 years old to study. And then it's a classic story of working here, getting my immigration and green card, marrying a U.S. person, my wife, and also then getting a citizenship and going to work. I accidentally then went to Silicon Valley. I called myself the accidental tourist. Ended up in Silicon Valley in 1982 when Apple was a tiny company, Oracle was $1 million entity, and so forth, and was able to participate in the creation of Silicon Valley itself and I've been here 38 years now. So that's my background. I've worked in the tech industry and then went on to become an angel investor. But my real passion is to build networks that make an impact. And we can cover that a little bit later. That's a brief story about myself.
I mean, you've truly surpassed kind of the American dream. That's really inspiring. You mentioned that you kind of helped found Silicon Valley and one of the first angel investment firms, Sandhill Group. Can you tell us how you got started in that and why?
Yeah, I had a decision to make when I was reaching an age to have kids. And my wife and I wanted to have children, but I also wanted to be kind of like a stay-at-home dad. That was the real decision to do this. So I quit corporate life and became an angel investor so I could work out of home and run my own business. That's kind of how I got started. And in 1996, there was no such thing as angel investing. And so in the early days, the Wall Street Journal was quite intrigued with what I was doing. So they sent a reporter to follow me around for a couple of years, which then resulted in a front page article about angel investment. And that gave me my 15 minutes of fame. Now this is my next 15 minutes of fame here. But that's what got me on the map. Started by just talking to people I knew in the software ecosystem here and trying to help entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs who had a PowerPoint deck to start new businesses. That's kind of how I started. Really didn't have a path of raising a fund or looking at the returns. I really enjoyed the industry and I wanted to give back in my own way.
Wow, and it seems like once you got there, everything started moving so fast. Was it hard for you to break into that industry?
Well, like I said, I was a pioneer. There was no real industry in '96.
Yeah.
And so it was one of the early ones who started creating the industry. So it was being a pioneer, telling people what you do and so forth. There was not that much competition because there were not that many angel investors. But as time went along, the network grew and grew, and was able to really invest. And those were the glory days. Looking at it from '96 to 2000, you could have pretty much invested in any company and you would have made money. So it was a good time to get started looking back at it. Although
Yeah.
now, it looks so much more difficult.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly difficult to get into now. If you could tell our global audience one thing for this digital summit, what should they know about you?
Well, I think my passion really is to build networks that make an impact. So I'm always trying to, when I meet people, see if I can add value to them, add value to their network and my network. So that's the one thing you need to know about me is that's what I focus on.
Brilliant. So we've kind of talked about your time with Sand Hill Group, and in 2007, you co-founded the Corporate Eco Forum. What was that experience like to venture out and start something new?
Yeah, so let me step back for a second and talk about building networks to make an impact. I had a crack at that when I was doing Sand Hill, where I brought together 100 CEOs of the leading software companies. And the reason I did that was when I quit corporate life, I had a Rolodex of 4,000 business cards, and I didn't know what to do with them. And this was in the mid 90s, right? And you go, there's no LinkedIn, there's no Facebook. How the heck do I keep in touch with people? And one of my friends said, you have to have a party. And I said, wait a minute, what does that mean? He said, a conference. And that's kind of how I pulled these people together. And in the early days, I decided to do this, even at that time, as a charitable endeavor. So everybody, including keynotes, would pay us lots of money to come to the conference, to speak and to network. But all the surplus would go to charity. So that's kind of how I got started. And that's why I say networks that make an impact, whether it's philanthropic or whether it's adding value to the network itself in terms of industry issues, how to deal with problems in your own companies. That's what I mean by networks that make an impact. So that was my first stint, was running the enterprise retreat, which I ran at Pebble Beach for 10 years for the leaders in the tech industry. And over time, we gave away over $1.5 million to different nonprofits, and the members themselves who gave the money were also able to advise them, mentor them, give them more money through their corporate philanthropy and so forth. So that was my first network. So in 2007, when I was trying to do something different, and this again was for my kids, I wanted to be a good role model for them. And I figured at that time, green was coming up, green tech, clean tech. So I said, hey, why don't I try to do something in that space to help people? That's kind of how I got involved and in starting the Corporate Eco Forum. We went and talked to about 80 individuals in Fortune 500 companies to find out what their green strategies were. And that resulted in the formation of CEF, as we call it. So it's a membership group of right now 70 of the world's largest companies. These are companies like Amazon and Microsoft, and Apple and Disney and UPS and Ford, all the big brand names. And we work with an individual in those companies called the Chief Sustainability Officer to help that individual really share best practices, innovation, ideas, collaborate with other companies. And the membership right now is about $4 trillion in combined revenues. So these companies can move the needle and make a big impact to mitigate climate change, to buy renewable energy, and so forth.
Wow, yeah, you played a role in innovation in it sounds like all kinds of different sectors. Why do you think that the global goals are so critically important, and how do you see innovation playing a role in achieving them?
Yeah, great question, Cooper. So with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that have to be, the world has agreed, all the countries have agreed to implement by 2030, is a big, big challenge for all of us. And these companies are aligned with achieving these goals, because large corporates have to put their weight behind it as well. It can't just be governments or individual citizens. it has to also include corporations. And so many of them are looking at their own sustainability goals and aligning them with the SDGs. And I know it's a complicated task, but most of them are charging ahead. And it's very important because we got to really make sure everybody gets a job. Everybody has clean water, clean air. And so these are very important because corporations can't survive if they don't have customers or if they don't have consumers. So it's also in their self-interest to really make sure that it's a sustainable world for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What is an example of a cross-sector partnership you created to serve as a model for organizations?
Yeah, so in 2012, every 10 years, and I hope in 2022 this happens as well, there's a summit. It's called the Rio Plus Summit. This was first done in Rio and then has been held again a couple of times. So the Earth Summit, which is held every 10 years, was happening in Rio in 2012. And one of the things that we were trying to accomplish there was to show that natural resources, land, water, forest, all the other natural things around us have value. So many of our customers got together from many different industries to show the value of nature, what it means to have good water, good energy, and good climate, and lakes and streams and everything else. So we pulled together a coalition of 24 of our member companies who we took to Rio at that time to make a commitment to valuing nature. And so that was one of our early collaborations we were able to do with our member companies.
Wonderful, wonderful. So moving on kind of from your work at CEF, when you decided to venture out to another organization, Indiaspora, can you tell our audience what your work was like there and what your mission was?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of things. Like I said, I'm always intrigued by building a network, but also when I go into it, I make a 10-year commitment at least, because these networks take time to build, to expand, for people to trust each other, and so forth. So it's not something I take lightly. As I look at these networks, the other big thing is if I'm giving a 10-year commitment, I look for impact as well. So any of these networks really, have to show at some point in time tangible impact. Like in the corporate eco-forum space, like I said, valuing nature, natural capital was one of our early objectives. Now we're working on all kinds of other collaborative projects that today are being released, and I can't name them at this point. But these are kinds of things that we get involved with to show that there's an impact. So in 2012, when I was looking at the Indian American community and trying to create this organization called Indiaspora, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. So anytime I think of a new idea, I socialize it. I go talk to a lot of people in that ecosystem. So in the case of Indiaspora, I went and talked to over 100 leaders in our community, doctors, lawyers, tech folks, VCs, academics, you name it. Every kind of individual in our community I talked to form this. And the thing that came out of talking to people was we needed an organization that really would do many things for our community. Again, just to give you a snapshot, the Indian American community is about 1% of the population of the US. But we're the most rich community. We make $110,000 on average per person. So it's a very affluent community. But what we found was the community didn't have enough influence, wasn't being projected to do work around philanthropy and so forth. So we formed this organization to do three things at that point. One was to get more politically engaged. We found that our community, even though it was 1% of the population, we had no representation in Congress. So one of the early aspirations was that we should at least have 5 people in Congress of Indian origin. So we started that in 2 election cycles, our whole network. Indiaspora can't give money or endorse anyone. It's a nonprofit. But the entire network wrote hundreds of thousands of dollars in checks to anybody with an Indian name. And within 2 election cycles, we had a big gala, an Indiaspora gala in Washington, D.C., to now say that we're 1% of Congress. So that was one of the early aspirations for the group, was to really get politically engaged. We also got involved in community issues. For example, the U.S. Postal Service has stamps for Christmas, as you know, and Hanukkah and Eid and all the other big religious holidays, but it didn't have one for the biggest Indian religious holiday called Diwali, which is celebrated by over 1 billion people. So we mounted a major campaign with the USPS to get a stamp. And there was a long effort. Working in Washington to get these things is not easy to do, as you know.
Yeah.
So I almost became a lobbyist to try and get a stamp, introducing legislation in the House and Senate, getting the community to write 20,000 letters to the Postmaster General. And so after 2 years, we were happy that in 2016, we got a stamp. Now, it might look like a symbolic thing, but for a community, that means we've become mainstream in this country. Indian Americans are part of the mainstream community, right? So that was another effort. Now, more recently, over the past 5 years, we've been working on philanthropy. Because one of the things, like I mentioned, we are a very affluent community. We do give back, but a lot of this giving is not formalized. A lot of this giving is not publicized. And so people really don't know what this rich community is doing. So one of the things we've done is to really look at what people are giving, encourage them to give more. We even have a program called Chalo Give, which is an annual kind of a giving effort, like Giving Tuesday, for the community to give back to different organizations and so forth. So Indian Americans have given a lot, for example, to education. We value that a lot. The Indian community has given over $1 billion to colleges and universities in the US in the past 20 years, for example, which is a big number. So we are doing a lot, but we need to tell people about it to encourage more people to do that. More recently, we have a program called Chalo Give, like I mentioned, around the COVID crisis. We raised in the last month over $1 million to feed people through the food bank system in the US and to feed migrant workers in India. So again, we get involved in really getting the community to do more, amplifying the work we do. And that's what Indiaspora is all about, is as a community, we can do greater than one individual.
Yeah, and I see the collaboration in that, this 1% working outside that and with everybody. I think that's really inspiring. That's amazing. And so mentioned previously, you talked about your career, your journey so far. If you could go back in time to say 1997, when you first broke into the industry, what kind of advice would you give yourself starting out in your career?
Yeah, I think one of the main points I would belabor is everybody needs a mentor. Even I have a mentor. It's not like I don't need help. So one of the things I would encourage everybody to do when they're starting their career or starting their company is to make sure you have a good mentor or mentors. That's one. Second is surround yourself with good advisors. They're different than mentors. So these would be industry experts, people who have done it before in your profession. So really get together a good group of advisory board people as well. So those are a couple of things that I wish I could have done even earlier in my career, because those are things that don't come to you intuitively. You just figure it out later in life, and it might be a little late. So I would tell everybody, before you get started in your career, in starting a company or becoming an entrepreneur, whatever you do, make sure you have good mentors and good advisors.
Wow, that's great advice. I'm actually writing that down right now. That's brilliant. So moving on from that, what are 3 key insights that have potential to help brighten the world?
Yeah, I would say one of the things I do is help anyone you can without any quid pro quo. That's been one of my principles forever, is if someone comes to you for help and you can help them, just do it. And I think it's something that I've taken to heart over time, and it's one of my values at this point. So just even a little bit, can go a long way if you help someone else. I think the second thing I would do is really build philanthropy into your life plan. Like I said, when I started my first conference in 1997, it was for charity right from day one, as opposed to for profit. So again, build and bake in your giving early in your career. One of my billionaire friends, he said his biggest regret is not having become a philanthropist earlier. This is someone who has signed the Gates Giving Pledge, being remorseful and saying, I wish I'd done it not at 60, but when I was 30. So really build philanthropy into everything you do. And I would say the third thing is just wake up every day trying to make an impact. Wake up and say, what am I going to do? The one thing I'm going to do today that moves the world forward. Just continually think of that as well.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. I'm speechless. That's really inspiring, truly. I'm so glad to have you here, and we're honored. Is there any way that you would like to reach out to our audience and plug anything you're doing or let them know what you're doing?
Absolutely. I can say, look at a couple of things. If you're in the tech industry, our website, it's a community website called sandhill.com, SANDHILL, which is the most important road in Silicon Valley that is full of venture capitalists who fund and change the world with new organizations, new companies. So check that out. And we have a newsletter there as well for people who want to be entrepreneurs. The second website is EcoForum, ECOFORUM, ecoforum.com. This will give you a feel into what large corporations are doing around climate change, sustainability, and all the other factors to make this world a better place. And then finally, Indiaspora. That's India, INDIASPORA, Indiaspora.org. And that's a website that gives you all the information about Indian Americans and how Indian Americans are doing things for the betterment of society and so forth. So those are just 3 of our websites to look at. They all have newsletters and such, but also, my Twitter handle is Mr. Sandhill, MR Sandhill, if you want to check that out as well. But would love to stay in touch with the audience. I think you are doing a phenomenal summit, and I really wish everybody great success.
MR Rana Swami from Ideagen and myself, we thank you for being here, and it was wonderful getting to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Cooper.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Here today with Chantaline Carpentier from the UNCTAD at the United Nations. Chantaline, welcome. What an incredible day to have you on Ideagen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's an exciting day during this incredible summit. Chantaline, going right into the interview, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background as well as some of the responsibilities you hold as chief of the New York office of UNCTAD?
Sure, always a pleasure. Well, I have sustainable development in my blood. I studied ag and environmental economics and started my career in the Brazilian Amazon, working with smallholders, trying to increase their revenues, to decrease poverty, and decrease deforestation at the same time. Then I moved on to the NAFTA, the DFRNC, North American Free Trade Agreement, to work on trade and environment. And remember during the Bush father and Clinton winning the election, and then the environmental movement being afraid of the environmental impact of the NAFTA, and so created the Commission on Environmental Cooperation. And so I served there as director of trade economy to look at the impact of this trade liberalization that was unprecedented between 2 developed and developing countries. And because I like big problem, I moved to the UN, and then because the UN convene everyone, right? And and we don't only cover trade and environment, we cover social issues and jobs and all the other issues that are important. So that's kind of my background.
That's incredible, Chantaline. And for those of you that don't know you, you're an incredible leader and someone who is consistently effective in terms of looking around corners, in terms of looking for sustainability, not only of the SDGs behind you, which you have laid out there, which is awesome, but also of the organization. In how can you be making constant impact? And that's what I think I'd like our viewers to get across today, is that they're hearing from someone who is truly helping to connect those dots across the planet, which is profound. And for our viewers again globally, what exactly is UNCTAD and what is its mission?
Well, yes. Let's start by the basics. UNCTAD, what does that mean? UN, Conference on Trade and Development. So we are a conference because we're born out of a conference that looked at the impact of trade on developing nations. And so the old idea that if you are a developing nation exporting your raw material and importing processed good, you always will have a trade imbalance. And therefore, how can you develop? How can you diversify your economy? And a few months after that conference, the G77, the group of 77 then developing countries, had a meeting and decided that they needed to come together to be able to negotiate. And they said, okay, but which policy are we going to put forward? And they decided that UNCTAD, the conference, should be maintained as an entity within the Secretariat to help them advance policies that will help them take advantage of globalization and trade. And our mission, you ask, is prosperity for all.
Well, that says it all. Prosperity for all. And what a moment. Let's think about this for a second. What a moment to be furthering a mission that is prosperity for all, which leads me to, what are some of the current projects you're working on? I mean, you're working on prosperity for all. What I should ask you, what are some of the projects you're not working on, because you're working on so many, but what are some that you'd like to highlight today?
Well, let's start with the obvious one, with the COVID-19. Of course, we're working with the rest of our sister organization and entities on the immediate response to the socioeconomic response to the COVID-19. In the past, the UN and other international organizations had the approach was to look at the humanitarian, then come in when there's a crisis, a health crisis, then you do the help, and then after you do development. Now what we're trying to do together, and we came up with a plan in 2 weeks, is to do a socioeconomic response to all at the same time. So one of the things that we're working on is a campaign for sovereign debt for developing countries. So a moratorium on paying their debt services because they don't have the money to invest in the health system that they need to invest. We also have a campaign to maintain port and maritime shipping open so that all of the population of the world can have access to medicines and personal protective gears, as well as food. And in the meantime, we keep working on a better recovery after this pandemic that will address some of the pre-existing condition that made some of our population more vulnerable than others. So we're working on e-readiness for developing countries. The COVID-19 is actually accelerating moving the economy to the digital space. So we need to make sure developing countries are on board, otherwise we're going to leave them behind. We're working on a global Green New Deal that would actually, several regions of the world have been talking about that, and that would be a way to finance the transition towards decarbonized economy, as well as a nutritious and sustainable food system for all, while reducing inequalities. And as you know, we work a lot on trade and gender and empowering women entrepreneurs.
You know, and that's just, I'm so happy that you laid out those key areas that you're working on, and my goodness, are they timely during this time of global disruption? And there are some glimpses of incredible innovation being accelerated throughout the global economy, while at the same time we're seeing some acceleration of poverty, et cetera, and your focus on helping to address that and to mitigate that as we're all trying to get through this together, literally, perhaps for the first time ever as a planet. Everyone has had this shared experience, everyone, from every corner of the entire planet Earth. And so it's been a remarkable moment, especially when you juxtapose upon it the technology aspects of it. But at the same time, you see folks like our friend Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan today, calling out, saying, look, there are some people that have been, adversely affected disproportionately by what's happening. And so I know that you and UNCTAD are looking at that globally as well and helping to address and to not let us lose steam on achieving the global goals by 2030, which is where I'm leading. So with these global goals, these 17 global goals, you know, Ideagen, we espouse the goals. We love the goals. We talk about the goals. We talk about awareness of the goals. You do the same, and we're all in this together. The private sector, the public sector, et cetera, et cetera. Why, I'd love to hear from you, why, in your opinion, in your professional opinion, and perhaps even your personal opinion, are these goals so incredibly critical to achieve by 2030?
Well, first of all, George, thank you for the work that Ideagen does. We need it, the like of Ideagen out there to support the work of the UN, because this is not the UN goal. The SDGs are the people's goals, right? These are, and it's clear in the Agenda 2030 where the SDGs are, that it calls on, for the first time, our decision makers are humbled in admitting that they're so ambitious, they can achieve them alone. We all need to do our part. So we're very grateful for groups like Ideagen that, and you personally, George, that help us achieve that.
Thank you.
But having said that, the reason that they're so important and to achieve them, first is it's the first time in humanity's history that we actually have universal goal across countries. Some of our countries at war with one another, doesn't matter. We all agree that these are the North Star. This is the roadmap that we are setting for ourselves. And I'll give you a specific example. This woman working in Bangalore, 5 people NGO. She's working to bring people from different castes together through art. And now that she has the SDG, she can go to Parliament and tell the Parliament that her project, though it's tiny, it is within this global umbrella of the SDG, where the whole planet is a movement moving towards the same direction. This is the power of the SDGs to me. Now, the power of the SDG is also acknowledging that we can't leave anyone behind. That we, and this pandemic, George, is showing us that we are as strong as the weakest amongst us. And this, as our health system is as strong as the weakest health system out there. Otherwise, we have to close our border. Imagine the Canadian-US border is closed. Never seen that in our lifetime.
Incredible.
That's because of we have vulnerable people that we can't protect. And therefore, with the SDGs, if we had advanced further on the SDGs, remember, one of the target is universal, affordable healthcare for all. If we had that when the pandemic hit us, we would be in a much better place right now. Poverty, if we didn't have people in poverty that actually have to go to work, everybody, they can't afford to be in a lockdown or stay home and have to expose themselves, we would not be where we are right now. It's very costly, the way we've built our economy, where people have to put themselves at risk to earn a livelihood, and is very costly to the rest of the economy. So, and the SDGs also tell us what, George? That we're not going to achieve prosperity for all. We're not going to achieve the SDGs if we only use 50% of the human capacity out there. That is, we need gender equality and economic empowerment of women. And so they're very powerful because they also show the interlinkages. We're very good as human beings to think about, oh, economic, let's maximize economic growth. Environment, let's minimize environmental impact. Social, let's eliminate poverty, let's provide education for everybody. But that doesn't work like this. We both know in politics, you have choice to make. And you have to hit the right balance between these 3 things. And you have to think outside the box to find policies that actually advance 3 goals while not regressing on the others. And this is the power of the SDGs for me. And they're stronger now. They're stronger now, and we need them more now than before.
That's right. And Chantaline, who would have thought that just a few months ago, when we were ringing in the new year, it's January 2020, and everyone's chatting about, looking at the future and looking at the timeline for the SDGs, 10 years to achieve the global goals.
Yeah.
By 2030. Who would have thought, who would have guessed, who would have even ever imagined that a few short months later, the entire planet would just come to a screeching halt because of an invisible enemy, which is this situation we're in. And At the same time, the goals remain. To your point, the goals remain. And to your point, I agree. I think the goals become even more important as a result of what's happened, because sustainability, in quotes again, becomes really important. Whether you're a small business, whether you're a big business, whether you're a government, whether you're an NGO, you now have to be thinking about how do you sustain what you've created. And I think what you've always said and what you've always done and what you've always practiced, Chantaline, because we've had the privilege of watching your work and your leadership, is the ability to create these cross-sector partnerships so that when, not if, when something happens that is unexpected, you're able to then pick up the phone or email someone because you already have this relationship in place. It's too late when you're in a situation to begin to try to figure out, who do I call and what do I do? That's where I believe the power of UNCTAD and the power of organizations like UNCTAD and the leadership of folks like yourself is so critically important. And so how are you and your colleagues using innovation and tech for good to help achieve both your goals at UNCTAD?
Well, first of all, we all went online. As of the 17th of March, pretty much everybody's online. So it's pretty amazing. I was talking to our IT person, and apparently the UN was one of the organizations that was ahead. On day one, we hit the ground. We had our Teams installed on all our computers, SharePoint. We had migrated all our files, and we were ready to go. And that is for the privilege of us, because we have access to broadband, we have the internet, and we have computers. Most of our kids are now online. I think it's the last stats I saw is 80% of the kids school age kids are online. I mean, are off, not at school. Yeah. So the privileged one are online. And again, there's a risk of leaving some of those kids even further behind if they don't have access to internet now. So we're using technology. We're using, of course, IT to do our day-to-day work, to do to Zoom and to all these technologies that we all have been using. Most of us are zoomed up by now. But we also use, as you know, UNCTAD has this big e-commerce for all initiative. And you talk about being prepared and readiness, George. And a lot of our colleagues had actually predicted we will have something like this. And we were asked to prepare, and we at UNCTAD had ring the bell and try to alert people that our economy need more resilience. But we didn't heed those calls. And this is why, and now it's way more expensive to fix this than if we had built resilience in the system to start with. And so that's what at UNCTAD we're trying to work on. So E-Trade for All is basically ensuring that developing countries can actually take advantage of e-commerce. This pandemic is pretty much sending us in the digital age that we was already engaged in a 5-speed overdrive speed. We need to make sure developing countries are ready to take advantage of that. E-commerce is growing even further than it was. As you know, we have an E-Trade for Women initiative. We're really working hard to ensure that women can capture some of these trillions of dollars of opportunities in achieving the SDGs and in the stimulus packages that are being put out there. And without conscious effort, will not go to women owners, will not go to small, medium enterprises. And as a result, it would further concentrate our markets, which are extremely concentrated already. And following the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, George, we saw a huge concentration in markets. And now we can't afford, we know we can't make the same mistake. And we need to address those issues right now. So these are the things, we're using technology to empower decision makers. So usually we would come at the request of countries and help them review their investment policy, their trade policies, their entrepreneurship policies. And now what we're doing is using the internet, doing videos to do the training and still be there with the decision makers in those governments to be able to ensure that the policy they put in place is going to help them leapfrog and rebuild better than where we started before the pandemic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's just profound. It's profound, and for a lot of reasons, I think it's so important that you just demonstrated why your work is so critically important, Chantaline, and it really is incredibly impactful. And the leadership piece is really where it all starts. And it would be interesting to hear from you for our global audience again. What are some interesting facts about UNCTAD and the United Nations that you wish more folks knew more about?
Well, let's see. I already gave stats about how small we are, right?
Yeah.
And yet, my Secretary General was out there. He called for a Marshall Plan for Africa. And it's being heated by now. But the African leaders are basically rallying for Marshall Plan. And actually, it's being heeded by the rest of the world. It looks like next week we're having a meeting on the Marshall Plan for the world. We also call on a standstill on, as I mentioned earlier, on debt repayment for developing countries that cannot service their debt in US currencies when they have no trade revenue, they have no remittances revenues, and basically they can't print their own US dollars, and they have to pay their debt in US. And we're saying we need a standstill. They can't pay these debt. Now they need to invest in their health system and in protecting those vulnerable people. We also, in addition, saying that we need to do some debt forgiveness, targeted debt forgiveness for countries that basically are highly in debt and could use some and do a little bit like we did, if you recall, George, when a lot of these countries were highly indebted countries, we forgave their debt as long as they were investing in the MDGs. Mm-hmm. Well, why can't we do something similar? And now we allow them to forgive their debt, but that money they would have serviced their debt with need to invest in the SDGs so that they're better prepared for these things in the future and they can catch up to us.
It's a great concept. It really is.
Another tidbits that I think your viewers are going to really like is that we're working on 33 core indicators. And you know that, we've talked about that. Now we've tested those 33 core indicators in 7 countries, in more than 20 companies. And most of these companies can report against these indicators without any problem changing anything. They have the data. Once we teach them where to go get the data, what would that do, George? Now you basically, it's not only about materiality. This is about, are you a good business? Are you aligned with the SDGs? Are you trying to increase your renewable energy? Are you increasing your energy efficiency? Do you have a diversity in your senior management? Are you trying to reduce water loss or any loss in your system? And these 33 core indicators are making their happy way into the international system. And we're seeing our Sustainable Stock Exchange initiative now. 96 exchanges around the world are members of our Sustainable Stock Exchanges. 4 years ago, we started asking some of them if they would be willing to ring the bell on 8th of March for the International Day of Women. Well, guess what? Now we have more than 50 that ring the bell for the international list. They do get it. And 50% of them are actually giving training to their listed company on how to report against the SDGs or environmental, social, and governance. These are transformative in themselves. Another thing that I find interesting is we have a program called Asikuda. It's an integrated modern custom system that we install in countries. Most country, probably that most people here country have that system. They don't even know UNCTAD, but we went in the country and helped their government. And now what it's helping is to help these medicines and these food and these personal protection equipment come in, because the custom agent don't have to touch each other, see each other. They can do it remotely because it's all electronic. And so these are some of the tidbits I like to share with you that people may not know about UNCTAD. And it shows the breadth of the work that we do.
It's remarkable. Let's say what it is. It's remarkable, and incredible insights that you've shared here. And going along that sort of line of thought here, could you take us back, Chantaline, take us back to that first day when you started at UNCTAD? It's your first day. What did you expect? And what was your perspective as you first started at UNCTAD?
That's a good question. It was 6 years ago, and it seems like it was 20. um, but I joined UNCTAD because I believe in the mandate. And you think UNCTAD, when we went with the acronyms, trade and development. So you think it's trade. We focus on trade, and I was a trade expert working on NAFTA for several years. But we're so much more than that. As you could tell by my previous answer, we work on customs. We work on port authority to increase the resilience of the maritime shipping, which, by the way, 80% of our trade is through maritime shipping. I didn't know that. And then we work on entrepreneurship. We've been working on entrepreneurship for 43 years. And before it was even, people were even talking about it. So what surprised me is the breadth of the work that we do and how much impact we have in countries. So every 3 days, we get a request from one developing country to come and help them with their investment policy, trade policies, competition policy, consumer protection, you name it, those macroeconomic policies, every 2 days. That means we've helped 142 countries in any point in time with 90 programs in helping them help themselves. This is not like, oh, we're gonna feed you. This is how can you feed yourself? Help increase your trade revenue, increase your investment revenue, investment channel to the right sectors so you can transform your economy, diversify your economy. So as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about it, but I did not realize how diversified and how deep the breadth of the work that we do and the passion of the colleagues that work on these things.
That's right. And, it's so interesting to go back in time, in a sense, to go back in time to your first day 6 years ago. And what's really striking, and I think what our viewers across the planet today will find as well, is that you seem to be more inspired today than ever by your work at UNCTAD. It really is remarkable. And so today, let's come to today. So you started 6 years ago. We come to today. What inspires you the most today? What is your inspiring, sort of project or galvanizing component of your mission today that's helping you to lead and to achieve these global goals by 2030?
Honestly, George, and I must just backtrack 1 second. I didn't say, this is a very interesting fact. For my induction, when I joined UNCTAD 6 years ago, I used to be at DESA, and I flew to Geneva for my induction the same day that we galvanized the SDG negotiation in July 2015.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and remember, I was helping the non-state actors negotiate the SDGs, and that same day we spent the night at the UN. I went home, packed, and went to Geneva for my induction. I stepped on that plane.
So wait, so you can't go anywhere until you help achieve these goals now? I mean, obviously.
There you go. I'm stuck.
Right.
I'm married to them.
And then we're going to have a big party when you help achieve the goals, right?
Exactly. We're all together. We achieve the goal. Yes. And this pandemic, if we handle it right, can help us get there, because it can represent the massive investment that we've been needed for that transition. But to get back to your question, economic empowerment of women, I think, is what's going to get us there. And that's what keeps me up at night. Women, we feel like women, we've made so much progress. We haven't, George. It's amazing. We're actually going back in many countries in terms of women's rights. Women in many countries do not have access to land. They can't own property. They can't borrow against any collateral. Even in the US, less than 2% of the venture capital goes to women entrepreneurs. We know women invent, engineer, and create differently than men. Our reality is different than your reality, right? We live things differently, so we create differently. And our needs are different. And we all know that to have adapted innovation, you need to involve the stakeholders into the design of these innovations. And yet we don't involve women. We just had a great conference on renewable energy and women and empowerment. And we know nothing. And women still, they're the largest user of electricity in developing countries, in the countryside, even in our country for that matter, in the household. But we never ask women what they need when we come and we bring these modern and clean cooked fuels. And then we wonder why the adoption rate is not higher. We need to involve. So we work a lot. As you know, UNCTAD is the secretariat to the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. And you've come to some of those sessions with us. And so what it is government coming together and looking at best practices, accelerating knowledge, so technology can help developing country leapfrog and not have to go to the dirty development process that we went through. And so this whole idea of bottom-up, pro-poor, frugal innovation with women on board, and often with women entrepreneurs and women owners of small, medium enterprises, is really what's going to get us there.
Incredible. And so shifting just a bit, and we've talked, and you've alluded to this a lot during this interview today. Chantaline, why do you believe the private sector is a key partner to helping achieve the global goals?
Well, you probably should answer that question, George. You're more qualified than me. But the reason is, first of all, I said that the UN alone can't do it, and all of us need to be on board, and that includes, of course, the private sector. The innovation is going to come from the private sector. We all know that. And we're seeing a huge increase in social entrepreneurship and impact investment and B corporation and all these entrepreneurs wanting to do well to do good by doing well. And we know this is the way we're going to get there. But it's also the financing. Remember these first statistics I presented when we first met, $2.5 trillion shortage in investment to achieve the SDGs. Many of these sectors where the private sector could invest and make money if they were to be able to adapt and do these frugal innovation that are affordable for these 6 billion people that are usually left out of the market. And so the investment will also come mostly from the private sector and from the financial sector. So we need the financial sector on board. We need them to be SDG aligned and then trickle down to the private sector. So the private sector actually do well while doing good. And now in our Financing for Development report last year reviewed all the meta-analysis out there of ESG and SDG aligned financial mechanism. And it is clear that in the worst case scenario, you're not doing worse by investing aligned with the SDGs or ESG aligned. And in the best of case, you do better. And in many cases, you actually have a better risk management when you are ESG aligned or SDG aligned.
Well, that says it all right there. That answers the question. And that's really remarkable. And, you know, that this fundamental shift in understanding whether it's a public sector organization or private sector organization or an NGO, you've seen, I think, thanks to really the framework of the SDGs, I think you can attribute a lot of this change in terms of the willingness of folks to partner. Yep. And I go back to goal number 17, which is one of my favorite goals as well, global partnerships, because it cuts through every other goal. You can't achieve any of the other goals unless you have these partnerships in place. And so goal number 17, appropriately so, ties it in together. And so we're in this short time span. We're heading to 2030, less than 10 years. We're coming out of a pandemic. You know, we can maybe see the other end, the other end of the tunnel where folks are hopeful, et cetera. Okay, now we're back and we're heading to achieve these goals. Okay, what do you see post 2030 as the most important focus for the UNCTAD, for the UN, for the planet? What can we see? Because it's a short time. We know 9+ years is not a very long time. What do you see as that post-SDG 2030 focus?
Well, I don't think we have that luxury, George. I think we need to do something now. Otherwise, the world's going to be something we're not going to like to see. And this is why our Secretary General, and I invite everybody to look at his speech he made on climate change and the SDGs and COVID-19, because we need to take this opportunity of this crisis where our government are printing money, throwing money into the market to just keep it going, and ensure that that money goes into not the old sectors, but the new sectors. the green sectors, the renewable energy, the nutritious and sustainable food system, equality, like gig economy. How do we deal with that when people have no social protection, no healthcare, no nothing, an increasing part of our population in that gig economy? It's time to look at what are the social protection floor needed to support when we know that the economy is going that way. We can't wait in 2030 to do this. We need to rebuild better now and use these fiscal policies that are being put in place, these stimulus packages. And even if we're going to be like in Canada, as you know, Canada is dependent on oil and gas and a lot of natural resources. And Premier Trudeau last week announced that the oil and gas industry and aviation industry, to get money from the government, will have to report against their climate change activities. So Canada signed up to net zero by 2050. Well, they're going to have to report on that. These are the type of using the crisis to kind of break these deadlock that we've been having, and some of these where we try to advance and there's always like, this is the opportunity to break some of those and the things that were impossible to think 2 months ago, George, debt relief for countries, right, are now possible. They're on the table. But the same is true for those industries and these transition to decarbonize economy and addressing these inequality issues so that we do not come back to this crisis in 10 years from now.
That's right. Chanteline Carpentier, UNCTAD chief, New York, a leader that is, a giant amongst leaders. We can't thank you enough because of your leadership, because of your consistency. By the way, I personally and professionally believe that leadership must be consistent. And we've watched over the years, Chanteline, your consistent leadership, bringing the sectors together, having these conversations, creating awareness. Look, not everyone agrees on how you get there, but we can all agree that we need to get there. Yeah. And that's the most important piece. And that's the beautiful thing about the Sustainable Development Goals, is that everyone agreed. All 193 member states came together and agreed on these goals. Like you said, it's the first time in global history of the planet where everyone agreed and said, you know what, we agree. And that was a massive feat. And you were part of that, like you said. And now you're literally part of that constant drumbeat to continue the awareness building and ultimately to hold folks accountable to help achieve these goals. Thank you from Ideagen for all you're doing. Thank you for the partnership that we have in helping to create this awareness. And thank you for your leadership across the planet. I'm so happy that our global audience today had an opportunity to hear from such an incredible leader like yourself. Chanteline Carpentier, UNCTAD.
Thank you, George.
Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we have with us Peter Fadelnik, Minister Counselor for the Digital Economy at the European Union Delegation to the United States. Peter, welcome.
Many thanks, George. Many thanks. Great pleasure being with you here.
Peter, it's always wonderful to connect with you and to have a conversation. Certainly, we'd love our global audience today during this summit to hear from you, to hear directly from you on what are your roles and responsibilities at the EU in your role as Minister Counselor for the Digital Economy?
Well, I'm working out of the Washington, D.C. office in a diplomatic role, and often I describe diplomacy as a form of journalism, except it's a two-way journalism. So my job is explaining the European Union digital policies and objectives to my friends here in the US, and vice versa. Equally, I explain US policy to Brussels. Now you can imagine that translation is quite an effort in this process. It's a very great job. It's a lot to learn, a lot to do, as digital is really one of these key policy areas we are focusing on. And perhaps I could just add, would be interesting, just imagine this pandemic would have hit us 20 years ago. If we all roll back 20 years, how exactly would we cope with the situation?
That's right. It's really,
Very, very different.
Peter, it's really remarkable in that, we just a few short months ago had a conversation about you presenting at a summit, and based on the changes in the format, we now have a digital convening, and very interesting. I'd like to go back. You talked about going back. How about going back to when you first started your career? What was it like when you first started with the EU?
It was a very different time. I think best characterized, that was a world driven by hardware. So tech, when we spoke about tech 20, 25 years ago or 30 years ago, tech was electronics, and electronics were circuit boards. Code was hardwired. That was the world when I started working for the Commission. That was the world when I started working in industry before. And in fact, a little anecdote here is I bought a Commodore C64 in 1985, which was my first way into programming in BASIC. But there was basically no use for software at that time. I found it, to be frank, I found it quite boring. I mean, I was working on little programs, but there were no users. There was nobody using it. So that was a world of hardware, and it has changed so much in the last 20 or 30 years.
Peter, that's really fascinating, to hear your perspective about the beginning of Peter's career with the European Union. Can you tell us a little bit about how you helped to drive forward internet innovation policies within the European Union?
Mm-hmm. If you allow me once more, sort of a bit of a flashback on my career, I started as a junior engineer. My first job was with Texas Instruments at the semiconductor factory in Germany. I wanted to get into this really cool business that was really top-notch engineering at that time. I wanted to know that technology and to learn that business. And fabs were at that time a place you could walk into. I worked in there with protective gear, and products were handled manually, shifted from machine to machine, and for the various next processing steps. There was a lot less software at that time, a lot less process-driven software. When you go into a fab today, it's just one big machine, the size of a large building. It's sealed off, fully automatic, robots are moving everything, software is controlling everything, costs you 5 billion before you get the first silicon out of such a factory. So what we have seen is that the last 30 years, software really has eaten the world. And I think this is something we have to appreciate, because there are profound policy implications. This is just the way things are today. It's not whether we like it or not, doesn't matter. This is the way the things are. And the better we can recognize the pros and cons, the better I think we will be able to move forward.
That's right. That's right. And after such a long career in the tech industry and dealing with technology, how has your background really helped to inform and affect a key role in helping us to overcome this global situation with the pandemic? How do you see technology playing a role in that?
Well, before we look into the future, let's maybe look a little bit back. Let's see what is at play already. So we have today an exchange of information, which is unprecedented. The public sector has a lot of information at their fingertips. Governments around the globe communicate within seconds. So there is a strong interaction with citizens. Citizens are part of that living of the pandemic as never before. We have all information, statistics available, updated every few seconds on a variety of websites. So I think that the level of information is very different what we have today. There is research ongoing in the background. High performance computers are being tasked to model drugs for finding treatment and vaccines. That hasn't happened, but it's happening as we speak right now around the world, not just here in the US. That happens in China, in Europe, in India, and in other places. Contact tracing is probably the next thing which is going to come. There's no point in going 10,000 of people who tracing people across a country, trying to give them a ring, and then they are not home or whatever. So there's a lot more we can do. So if we think longer term, I have the feeling we ain't seen nothing yet. And one of the things I can clearly see coming in managing that pandemic and mastering a similar situation better is artificial intelligence. We will see that this technology will be added to essentially every product and service. And AI is providing today already services for specialized for addressing the challenges of this pandemic. Let me tell you about a German company. It's a small startup. They developed software for spotting cancer on lung CT scans. There are many companies doing that out there. They claim to be very good. Now they pivoted within a fraction of a second in spotting COVID-19 on lung CT scans. And that's being integrated as we speak into the hardware or into the scanners sold by Siemens and Agfa worldwide. So there's a lot of really cool stuff through this crisis coming into the products and services.
That's right. And I think that's what, if there's a silver lining to everything that's happened, it may be that. It may be examples of like what you just cited, where you have a repurposing or a new discovery or an acceleration, or maybe a combination of all of those factors to help drive forward the planet in ways that previously perhaps we could not have either imagined, or maybe we didn't even think it was possible, but based on, you know, this focus and this immediacy to addressing the issue.
I agree. I think this pandemic is almost like a litmus test for mankind. You know, whether we are able to deploy all the technologies, all the knowledge we have, and put it to this crisis for the real benefit of people, and whether people will trust those solutions and technologies we're coming up. I don't think the answer is yet that clear. I think the answer is still outstanding. And it's going to be a very, very interesting test if all what policymakers are thinking, all what technologists are thinking is really ending up to the benefit of the people quickly.
That's right. And Peter, while we have you, and I think it's important to ask this question, you know, in terms of our global audience, so we have folks from just about every country in the world on the planet that have access and are watching this summit, this digital summit on innovation. What is the European Union's perspective, or the European perspective, I should say, on the pandemic? And then how do you see Europe and vis-a-vis that, the planet coming out of this?
I'm not sure if we have enough time in this conversation for going through an exhaustive discussion on this. I think, let me start that way. Rahm Emanuel used to say, apparently he's still saying, that never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that describes quite well how the EU is approaching the situation. There was a very quick taking of ownership of this crisis. There was very little discussion of, should we do something, maybe not. There was a very quick reaction saying, okay, here it is, we got to do something, we got to move. That quickly liberated early on thinking, not only about how do we mitigate the crisis, but sort of after the first masks were handed out, people were starting thinking immediately, what does it mean for afterwards? What do we have to do to get to a situation which is maybe not the situation as before, but a situation even better as we had before? And I think what played a big role in this kind of thinking was that the timing was, I have to say, at the end of the day, was very fortunate. This is an unfortunate crisis, but that it came in March in Europe was just a few months after the new European Union leadership took office. They were all in the mode of planning and rolling out new policies. And what you see now that the European Union has used that crisis as an opportunity to come back with stronger EU policies, with a bigger EU budget, which addresses not only the crisis, but addresses of what sort of society now or in 20 to 25. That's the planning horizon the European Commission right now is addressing.
Incredible perspective, Peter, and as always. And so during the course of your career, what is an example of one of your favorite projects that you've worked on, and why?
I think there are a couple of projects and initiatives where I entertain a vanity of being proud. I work for a public organization, so normally one isn't that proud of work you do there. But perhaps if I can name one, it is a project called 5Ware, or Future Internetware. We developed in that project an operating system, an open source operating system for cities, for factories, or in fact for any complex data environment. It breaks information silence, makes IoT simple, and transforms data into knowledge. And I think the key here was it's secure, open source, complying to EU values, and becoming a real export now. So because today, if you talk about data platforms, if you go in a city or in a factory, it doesn't matter. Platforms are closed, not interoperable. You cannot port your data somewhere else easily. You're hostage very often. You're hostage to your vendors to provide this technology. And frankly speaking, often you don't get a bad deal. In particular, the public sector never gets a good deal out of tech companies providing services to them. So platforms need to be open and interoperable, and 5Ware is this leading technology right now in providing that. And I'm glad and excited to see it grow every day.
Well, that's incredible. And that's a perfect segue, I believe, to my next question, which is related to the 17 global goals of the United Nations. So you probably heard me talk a lot about these. I know you and everyone across the planet refer to these, especially with the EU's lead on a lot of these goals and awareness and effectiveness in helping to achieve those. But in a perfect world, Peter, in a perfect world, if you had the choice and the ability, which goal of the 17 would you like to see achieved first, and why?
Well, I'm not sure if that is a trick question you're asking here, because you know very well that the Sustainable Development Goals, all of them are an interlinked system of policy indicators. So picking one is kind of neglecting the others, and I'm neglecting that they are actually connected. But you make me pick one, so I will pick one. And my lucky number in life has always been the 13, so I go for the 13, which is climate action. And there is no question today, climate action, there's no question that mankind has changed the face of the planet. Whether you call it climate change or something else, humans have introduced risks in the ecosystem we find hard and costly to manage today. That's pretty much a fact. You can look wherever you want. And maybe it is the right of humans to do so, to do and use that planet in whatever way they want. But from at the moment, it's the only planet we have. So we probably want to keep it habitable, perhaps retain most of the charm of this planet we love so much. So if you ask people out there what they love, people love nature. Flora and fauna is to be retained, what citizens want from policymakers. So it's not a question whether we want to do it. What is interesting is, if I pick climate action, it's maybe the outcome is a better environment, or more or less declining environment. But perhaps what is the more interesting thing here is with the Sustainable Development Goals, by pursuing one, you can get different outcomes, several outcomes. Clearly for the European Union and the EU Green Deal, it's about the economy. Achieving a climate neutral society and economy by 2050, this is the target, not just for a better environment, but this is also a better economic or environmental target. because we would like to build those industries which are necessary for society and economy in 10, 20, 30, 30 years from now. And that's an economic objective. And what I like here is that by just picking one, because I think one I can address all the others in an indirect way too. And this is maybe what countries or those who are working with sustainable development goals should realize. You don't have to go after all 17. You probably can only pick one at the end of the day. Do that and then pull the others along with it.
That's incredible insight, and I like how you from an analytical perspective broke down the goals and basically chose the goal that perhaps is most important to you personally and professionally, and then created that context for the connectivity to the rest. I personally like goal number 17, which is the partnerships piece as well, because without the partnerships, you also can't achieve all the rest. So it's really fascinating. But what I agree on wholeheartedly, and what I believe Ideagen espouses is the belief that we can achieve these global goals by 2030, that it's absolutely vital to have awareness at a baseline of the goals. What are the goals? And for people to understand that there was a unanimity, that the United Nations agreed unanimously on these 17 broad goals. There was no dissension around the final agreement around these 17 broad goals. And to your point, no matter what you call any of these goals and how you frame them, they're all critically important, and every country in the world, including the United States, has agreed to these. So I think for all of us as citizens of global citizens of the planet and the rest, it's great to be aware and to then, if we can, do our part to help achieve the goals by 2030.
If I may add something here.
Yeah.
It's almost a little paradox that some people believe the United States is not or should not be the leader on the sustainable development goals. Clearly, society and economy is this most optimist society on the planet I have ever met. A society completely living in this anticipation of a better future and mobilizing today everything in order to get there. So it's sort of this super big asset the United States has as society, as economy, in just coping with essentially any problem coming down the timeline. And I don't think it would be a disservice to call the United States maybe not a leader in this.
That's right, and it is, and I think when the MDGs concluded and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, began, and that shift to focusing on all of the countries involved instead of just developing countries, perhaps, that then became important. And then that's why I believe the awareness piece is so important, because these are not the MDGs. The MDGs were a great start, as everyone knows, but the SDGs include problems and issues that are right here in the United States of America or any other country in the world. So it's not just we're trying to help another place, it's we're helping our communities too. So there's that angle that I think is also critical for the awareness of these global goals. I mean, it's one planet, to your point. There's poverty across the planet, including in the United States. There's human trafficking right here in the United States. All sorts of issues that are not somewhere else. They're also right here. So I think it's important to have that contextualization of what is important and how it impacts your community as well, in order to really be able to understand how you can even make a difference in your community and at the same time be helping to achieve the global goals, right? So it's not separate. It's all interconnected. And I think, I'd like to ask you, Peter, what, from your vantage point, because you live so close to this, is one good way to help achieve the global goals?
Well, it's probably this same recommendation for any other policy. Policy only works if it has a positive effect on the people. If it improves the individual circumstances of a person, or if it has a positive economic effect. If you can show that from a policy, it's not going to work. Now, and I think now there's actually thinking about it, a second element to it. Policy only works if it creates a positive perception by the citizens. So people understand why this is being done. They're part of that process. Is by ensuring co-creation and a participatory governance model. This is nothing you can really organize completely top-down. It doesn't work. You're not flexible enough. So you have to serve the whole value chain, which starts with the individual citizen, goes to civil rights communities, goes into the industry, goes into all branches of government. Only if you adopt an approach, which is this participatory governance model, you have a chance of implementing any of them. It's also an old management rule, that you have to co-locate the means of achieving something with the responsibility of achieving something. And very often, the means and actions are in the lower parts of government branches.
Peter, incredible insights. And so if you had an ask, a question, or something to do to our global audience that's listening today, and it is an ask post-summit, what would that be? What would you ask folks to do?
There's, societal and economic progress are a step-by-step process, and there is a balance required, or do you have to balance the attention to immediate policy needs versus long-term policy goals? But there is one piece where I think we're not paying enough attention to, and I would appreciate if the audience at least would sort of take a moment to reflect upon what I would like to propose. We have to create trust in a digital world. I believe we live in a trust crisis right now. Trust in government is eroding. Trust in business is rock bottom low already. Trust is hard to create by rules, so we probably have no real approach as government to create that trust. So I would urge people to think about how can we address this trust crisis before we get into doing other things. So what can government do? What should civil society do? What should businesses and business associations do to create trust? And those who are more skeptical about what I'm saying about trust, I would highly recommend looking at some statistics of Pew Research, particularly the one from November last year, 2019, which looked at trust in the digital economy. The numbers are devastating. Very, very, very low levels of trust by consumers and citizens in these marvelous technologies we all want to have, but we just don't trust them.
Peter, that's incredible. And I often think about that and refer to that. I think there was a time when perhaps when there was less information, and there were only a few sources of that information that you could argue maybe were trusted. And today, you have limitless sources of information. If you Google anything on any issue, 1 million answers will come up. And who then do you know to trust? And I think that may, my own perspective, but maybe plays a role in it. There's just so many sources of information, thanks to this digital world that we live in, that perhaps it's tough to put that badge or that seal of this is a trusted source on just one entity when you're getting so much information from so many different angles. And so I think it's a perfect shift to, Peter, if I were to ask you, what is an inhibitor of helping to achieve the goals? In other words, what are some of the roadblocks that you see in helping to achieve these goals? Just a few months ago, again, we were looking at this runway to 2030, 3,500 odd some days to get to 2030. There's a roadmap, as you mentioned, across Europe and throughout the world, new leadership in certain countries. Everyone's excited to do something either new or to implement projects, etc. And then we get this global pandemic. And, there's optimism that perhaps we'll come out of this with some good news, perhaps. But in the end, there's been a large toll on a whole planet. The whole planet, really, for the first time in history, endured something together. We're still, by the way, enduring it, right? And it's a collective experience, unlike anything anyone's ever seen. Everyone in the farthest reaches of the world is experiencing the same thing. And so beyond that, what do you see as that roadblock, as that inhibitor for achieving the goals? Has this set us back in terms of achieving the global goals, or do we have an opportunity, perhaps, just a question, to accelerate the potential of achieving these global goals by 2030?
I'm a relentless optimist, and that's not by experience, that's by choice. So I think you're right. First, we have to use the crisis. There is no other option. You can decide whether the glass is half full or half empty. That's a decision. And we should decide that the glass is half full and take it from there. The biggest inhibitor, and I think you alluded to it a bit in your question or in your previous comment, is that there is so much noise today out there. This noise factor in this conversation is disinformation and misinformation. And it's a tremendously strong signal today in the public space. And there is a tangible risk that this noise becomes so loud that society loses the ability to act rationally. I have no doubt that we are probably at the cusp of losing control of this, of losing an understanding of what's real, what's fake, what do I want, what is my role here. And we should not neglect the risks coming with it, because it's like disorientation. You can only achieve a goal if you know where to go. If we lose the ability to locate where we are, the way we want to go, we are hopelessly lost in space completely. And I think these disinformation and misinformation campaigns are very effective and low-cost methods of disorienting entire countries for a very long period of time. This is something, and I'm not suggesting that I have all the answers to the question, because for years we have been looking on working on this topic. There are gradual improvements possible, but I think there is a deeper issue. And I wonder whether the deeper issue has to do with education and how we educate people.
That's right. And there's no doubt that having, again, those trusted sources of information is vital, because, again, we're getting so much of it. There's so much information, and there's so many different aspects to this that it's sometimes very difficult to distinguish between not necessarily just what is true and what isn't, but where are the gray lines here, and where are the guardrails in having a conversation that you understand what the real facts are, I should say. Like, I like when folks are talking about the pandemic and they're talking about the science and the data. I know that you can have different sets of data, and I know that you can look at science and have different experiments and come to different conclusions based on what the sets are that you input. However, you can develop a mean to develop that average where you can have a fairly decent understanding of what the reality is that you're dealing with. And I think, to the credit of governments around the world, I think they've been strident, including the European Union, together with the United States, in helping to develop this sense of here's where we are. I don't think there's been any kind of a disagreement that I can see that says, well, no, that's not accurate, in terms of the science and the data around what we're experiencing. And so, shifting a bit, the Sustainable Development Goals, multilateralism, is that a good approach? Is that the only approach?
George, I think we already live in a multipolar world with competing socioeconomic systems. I think this is what we should first recognize. I'm not suggesting whether the EU's social market economy, the US capitalist system, or China is doing best. Doesn't matter. And anyway, what's best in this definition here? But there are different ways of organizing, different approaches of organizing society and the economy. We have to recognize that. And we have to think hard how to cooperate effectively among those systems, different systems, and yet compete at the same time. And that's the key in here, because there's nothing wrong in cooperation or neither in competition, but we need a rule book for that. Otherwise, it becomes a crazy run, and everybody runs in whatever direction. What is helpful in multilateralism, or what we start learning now, is that we have to do away with the notion of winner. This is not about being first or being a winner. That's not a metric to measure any success of multilateralism. The rule book I referred to is for the multilateral cooperation, what is international norms and rules we can agree on and rely on. This rule book, without such a rule book, progress will be elusive in society. We will only pocket temporary successes at the expense of somebody else, but as a society and economy worldwide, we will not be able to move forward if we are not able to build or go back on an agreed rule book. If we question everything all the time, you get nowhere. And this is a little bit the question. So is there a useful option to multilateralism? If we think 20 to 50 years ahead, I don't think so. I think we will have to come back to developing international norms and rule books and get as many as we can around the table to agree with them. It will take time and money to do so, but the investment will be great because we will be able to stand on the shoulders of those who have developed those rules.
That's right, Peter. And so, based on your experience, and you've seen so much in the development and the quantum changes, to use that term, quantum changes in technology. I mean, we've seen, gosh, just in the past decade, unimaginable advances in technology across the board. Internet of Things, just technology for vehicles, you name it, healthcare, finance. What do you see, Peter, as a paradigm change, having the potential of a paradigm change in technology?
At least right now, I spend a lot of time working on artificial intelligence. And I think the more I see about this technology, the more I start understanding how profoundly it will change how we organize society, how our economy will be run. And there are several reasons. First, it's clear that already today, artificial intelligence drives more and more data-driven services. This narrow AI does a pretty good job. I'm using Spotify. It's pretty cool what I get recommended there. It's not just taking you down to a rabbit hole. It's a pretty good way of letting you experience the whole universe of music. However, what basically is maybe the downside is to understand the inner functionings remain elusive and to most of us, and it's even counterintuitive at many times. So this leads to this mystification of AI and giving rise to speculation. So I think we should spend a lot more time on understanding what AI is, how AI is working. I don't have to understand all the deep parts of it, but to give a good understanding that this is a technology which is useful to be deployed as much as possible. I have a car, it has a combustion engine. I don't know exactly how a combustion engine functions, but I think somebody has thought about it. It's kind of working. I like it. So I think we have to see as AI as a bit this combustion engine of basically every data-driven service in the future. What is interesting here is that Finland put out a course to train 1% of its entire population on AI. That's about a 20-hour course everybody can take. It's called Elements of AI. It's also available in English. Some 410,000 people have taken that course so far, and it's for an audience of you and me and everybody out there to understand there's nothing mystical. This is technology. Somebody made it, and it's working well, and the risk can be managed. And this is something we should perhaps take as another example or an objective here of let's train 1% of the entire world population on AI.
Peter, you've created a thought-provoking moment because, you know, prior to the pandemic, we heard a lot about the mismatch between skilled workers and the education needed to get into those skilled positions, and then the availability of those positions. So millions of jobs not aligned with the available skill sets. And now we're looking at this pandemic, which is forcing us to really rethink industries that you would have not, at least in the near term, thought about rethinking, like the restaurant industry. Think about the transformation that's happening digitally and otherwise. Think about the financial services industry. Healthcare is one of the ones that we're really looking at. I mean, if you look at healthcare delivery and telemedicine and all of the things you're talking about, and add a layer of AI onto that, like you mentioned at the onset of this program during this summit today, thinking about being able to spot lung cancer in these x-rays from a digital perspective, perhaps faster than the human eye, or equally important, maybe more accurately than the human eye. Then we're talking about game-changing situations. And then let's think about for a moment the world coming together in record time to help develop what will potentially be a vaccine for this virus, and how all these companies, all the barriers between scientists have opened up for collaboration to allow for that understanding on what is happening in labs across the world to again be able to address this pandemic. I want to applaud you and what, you know, everything that you're doing, Peter. I know you're a huge advocate for technology, and as Minister Counselor for the digital economy, certainly it's an important issue for you. I really applaud your work and your vision, and you really are an optimist, and then so am I, which makes it a great, simple. You know it's going to be a great conversation when you get two optimists together. We both believe in a better day tomorrow. I want to thank you personally and professionally for taking time to join us during this Digital Innovation Summit presented globally by Microsoft. We could not be more thrilled to be having conversations with folks like yourself, because all of these issues are so important. We could go on for several hours and make it a summit in and of itself. Unfortunately, I know your time is limited, so I want to again say thank you. Thank you, Peter. How can folks find out more about your work at the European Union?
Follow us. We are on Twitter, European Union Delegation to the United States.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for having me. Greatly appreciate.
Peter, thank you.
Take
Thank you
care.
very much. Thank you for all you're
George.
doing. Thank you for changing the world. Ideagen TV, Innovation Summit. Thank you so much. And what an incredible day, again, to have Gene Axius, Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership from AARP with us today. Gene, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, George, for having me. How are you?
Gene, you know, we're all in this moment in time. You know, just a few short months ago, we were 3,500 odd some days from the 2030 marker for achieving the 17 global goals of the UN. And a few months later, we're all in a pause, in a sense. The entire planet is in a pause in terms of travel, in terms of work, in terms of many aspects of what were in January. And here we are now, almost in June. The world has changed. Quite a bit.
Right.
And your mission is to challenge conventional wisdom and establish norms, especially as it relates to older adults, right? And that these new possibilities for older adults hold promise.
Absolutely.
especially for strengthening societies, expanding economies, and improving life for all ages, which I think is just an incredible mission. And often these older adults, as we've seen time and time again, are stereotyped and reduced to a singular narrative in the digital world, especially. And what do you see as common myths or outdated beliefs about older adults?
Well, George, first of all, thanks again for the opportunity to be with you today. I think this is such an important conversation. And I think you're absolutely right that things have changed quite a bit. And I think part of what we need to think about is what are the opportunities that this time is presenting to us? What are some of the lessons that we're learning from this pandemic? And what are the solutions that we need to cultivate in order to ensure that once we get through this time, that we will be much better off. One of the things that I think is very clear, particularly for us at AARP, is really to challenge outdated beliefs and stereotypes, particularly around older adults. As you can imagine, in general, there's these negative perceptions about older adults. And I think that COVID-19 in many ways is challenging some of that. One of the misconceptions and stereotypes is the fact that older adults are not comfortable with technology, that older adults don't know how to use apps, that they are fearful of technology. And I think that what we're seeing through COVID-19 is the fact that more and more that's not true. That in fact, older adults are comfortable with technology, that they are able to adapt, that they are doing Zoom calls and FaceTime and using technology to connect with their grandchildren, with their children, with other family members. I also want to say that it's very clear that we are also seeing the resiliency of people over the age of 50. This negative stereotype that older adults are, it's about decline, that they're a liability, it's simply not true. Older adults are living longer, they're striving and thriving, and they want to provide value and roll up their sleeves and help our societies in very meaningful and significant ways. They want to be partners in their communities, and they want to be they want to help.
And you've just highlighted the mission that you're working on daily, which is profound, Gene. And what we're seeing today is also an incredible spotlight on inequality. Older folks and across the spectrum, you're seeing all of the inequality highlighted across the planet. What are you seeing, and how can we take a lesson to address where we're at today and what we're seeing?
So there are two big trends I think that's critically important for us to kind of look at with regards to COVID-19, and there are several. One is the fact that how this has disproportionately impacted older adults, particularly those living in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. And that is just not a US problem. That is a global problem. When you look at some of the starting statistics that are coming out of long-term care facilities in Europe or Canada and some of these other countries, as well as within the US, and the number of deaths and tolls, I think within the US we're upping close to 30,000 residents who have passed away as a result of COVID. What I'll say is this, is the fact that COVID-19 did not create these inequalities or these issues. COVID-19 has laid them to bear for us to see. These issues existed prior to COVID-19, and it's just exacerbated as a result. And I think we have two options. One is that we can go through this and create what I refer to as patch-like solutions. So you're just patching things up, or we can really be bold and be courageous and really think about how can we reimagine our future in a way that really puts older adults, their families, their communities in the center of our redesign. And I think that's going to be key. I think that's going to be key moving forward for us to really think about what does it mean to live a life of dignity and purpose across the lifespan. What does that mean to be valued and to be able to contribute across the lifespan? And how do we ensure that our systems and the options that we have are in place to facilitate that? And I think that's a conversation that we need to have. I think that conversation needs to happen across industries, across sectors. And I think we all need to be involved in that. So there's a collective responsibility that comes to these that we have to bring to this conversation, as well as what we are going to do from an individual's perspective in order to help solve some of these dynamic issues. The other trend that I mentioned is that we're also seeing a disproportionate impact on vulnerable communities, whether that is communities of color or low-income communities. And again, that too is not just specific to the United States. And I think we need to really kind of step back and say, what are the lessons we're learning from COVID-19? The beautiful thing is that we're seeing people roll up their sleeves across generations, across income brackets, to really say, you know what, we're in this together. COVID-19 has impacted and affected us all in various ways. And I always say that I think in many cases, we're all grieving in some way, either because of the fact that we've had someone or we know someone who has lost their life to COVID-19, or because of what used to be, the yesterday, the things that we took for granted, the ability to go to the mall, the ability to go to the coffee shop, the ability to go get a haircut. You look nice, by the way, George, so you're going to have to tell me what you did. But you know, you really kind of thinking about that, right? And as a result, we have to kind of reimagine what we want to be as a society moving forward. And I think that now's the time during this pause for us to really reflect on that.
That's right. That's right, Gene. And you know what I like about your leadership style is that you always mention being bold and being courageous. I've heard you say that many times, and I really like that, because you can't do any of the rest to affect change and implement change and create change without being bold and courageous.
Right. And
yeah,
you know, I think that's what's going to be required. I honestly do think when you think about a lot of the traits that we're going to need leaders who are bold and who are courageous. Recently, the CEO of Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase sent a letter out to his shareholders. And in that, there was a call to action. And he laid to bear. He highlighted, even in his letter, that COVID-19 has really illustrated the stark inequities, and that these inequities has long existed prior to COVID-19. That there's been so many people living on the edges of life. Living on the edges of life. And as we kind of think about what we're seeing, and is what he put in his letter, is that we all have a responsibility to really think about how can we invest, how can we act, and how can we ensure that we all are better off at the end of the day.
You know, you mentioned Jamie Dimon. I cite Jamie a lot because he is an example of bold and often courageous leadership, especially on issues that are of such utmost importance as we're discussing today. And the work that you're doing each and every day, Gene, is parallel to that, because you're helping to address, to highlight, and to solve so many of these intractable issues that not only the United States is facing, but that the planet is collectively facing. I think that's an important distinction. It's a similar distinction to where we are with the global goals of the UN. The global goals of the UN, the MDGs, their predecessor, were really focused external to the US. They were developing countries. They were somewhere else. But what we see with the Sustainable Development Goals is that all of the issues contained therein apply to the United States of America as well, to your backyard, to my backyard, to everyone's backyard here in the United States and abroad. So it's a collective experience.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, all of the conversations that we're having are tracking alongside what you're saying. It's incredible to see that bold, courageous leadership like that of your CEO, Joanne Jenkins,
yes,
who is relentless in talking about the inequality, and relentless in terms of talking about, the older person as, and the stereotypes that you just alluded to that are pervasive in certain areas. And so I'd like to ask you the questions: how is your work helping to support or challenge these myths and misconceptions?
Well, you mentioned Joanne, and as an example of bold and being a fearless leader, and that is so true. She is such an inspiring person, a leader who has really infused a sense of purpose and a great sense of innovation with respect to the work that we're doing at AARP. Her work around disrupt aging, really helping us in our society really think about some of these negative stereotypes and some of these outdated beliefs, and why it's so critical for us to confront and disrupt those mindsets and shift those attitudes in a way to really ensure that we can help everyone and empower them with the tools and the resources that they need in order to live the life that they've designed for themselves. So between the work of Disrupt Aging, as well as the work that we've been doing around the longevity economy, part of the effort is really to showcase the value and the contributions of the 50+ population. We released a report called the Longevity Outlook that looks at the economic value of the 50+ population. And what we found was that the 50+ population spent roughly around $8.3 trillion in 2018. And if you were to look at that by 2030, it will be roughly around 28 trillion. So you have this tremendous opportunity, particularly with this aging population, both in terms of the economic value that they provide. If you were to just look at the economic contributions as its own country, it would be the 3rd largest country in the world, next to China and the US. That's huge. And we also know that as part of the economic contributions of the 50+, that the 50+ are also spending a lot of money on technology. In fact, the 50+ population spent $140 billion in technology in 2018. And if we were to project that out to 2030, 2040, 2050, you're looking at a 6-time fold. By 2050, about 647 billion. So it's significant, that type of work. And we do those type of reports to really showcase the value of the 50+ population, and to work with industry leaders to help them not only see the economic value, but more so the moral value in terms of really looking at the humanity of people, and to challenge their own assumptions of what they think old age look like, and to really create products and services, and to design products and services, or to even show images that really show that this population is growing, that they're aging, that they're living longer, that they are vibrant, that they are contributors, and that they're not a liability. In fact, they're a huge asset to our economy, and everyone benefits as a result of that.
And, this report cites incredible data. I mean, the numbers that you just highlighted are just staggering. And I think it's eye-opening for folks that have those, preconceived notions that those 50+ perhaps are not as astute in technology, maybe don't purchase as much technology, are not as active within technology. And so how would you, if you were a business, how should business look beyond these stereotypes and recognize that there are just incredible, mind-blowing opportunities with working with an aging society? What would your advice be there based on your research and work each and every day?
Sure. So there's a couple of things to that, George, and I think that's a great question. And when we look at 2019, 51% of older Americans purchased some form of technology. The top purchases, if you think about it, was smartphones, computer and laptops, smart home technology, smart TVs. 91% of people over the age of 50 have a computer. 70% have an iPhone or some type of phone. And then we know that 94% of all people over the age of 50 are extremely comfortable with technology. I think that part of the advice and part of the conversation that we're having with our colleagues in the technology space is really to showcase why it's so critically important to think about their customer base. And we've had a great opportunity to actually go to CES to really have a range of engagements there, where Joanne, our CEO, has actually has been a keynote speaker, and we've had a tremendous amount of presence throughout CES with that in mind. In part because of the fact that if a business is truly consumer centric, then it's critically important for our technology, the technology sector and industry, to really think about the changing composition of their consumer base. And it's not just the fact that older adults are using technology more, but they're also purchasing technology, as I indicated before. And they're not only purchasing it for themselves, they're purchasing it for their grandchildren, they're purchasing it for their families. So this is really an imperative to really think about how do we start to create products and solutions that really meet the needs of a changing population. And what assumptions do we have in our mind about the image of aging that might impact the design of the products that we create? And what do we need to actually start to do to start to change that in a very meaningful and significant way in order to not just ensure that your customers are happy, but more importantly, and equally importantly, that as a business, you're still around. You just can't ignore this market.
Such a great point. And I think it's a great point because business, mirrors what typically society is leaning toward. And I think you highlighted Jamie Dimon with JP Morgan earlier. I think you need the leaders within these businesses and industries to lead, to step up like Jamie does and often does and has, and others, to say, here's what's important, to set that tone. As I mentioned in my recent Forbes piece, setting the tone is critical. It's a critical component of leadership. And it's like you're beating the drum, you're constantly saying, and it's not a euphemism. It's very, very important. And it's a critical element to that. And so what do you think the private sector response to an aging society should be?
That is a great question. That is a great question. It's one that we've been focused on, particularly with the work that we've been doing around living, learning, and earning longer. We know that people are living in are aging, and they're living longer. In many cases, they either want to or need to work, and that many companies are managing 4 to 5 generations in the workplace, and that's a plus. That's a benefit. And what we've been doing over the course of the last year with the World Economic Forum and OECD has really been highlighting the benefits and the promising practices and the insights of what does it mean to really foster a multi-generational workforce, and what are the benefits, not just to the workforce, but also to the company itself. Right now, we have a collaborative that we've created with the World Economic Forum and OECD. And the purpose of the collaborative is to foster that age-inclusive nature, particularly within the workforce, to really foster a multi-generational workforce so that we can create, invest, and prosper. And what do I mean by that? Private industry in particular, with respect to the future of work and the future of workplaces and workforces, are at the front lines. And given the fact that many people either want to or need to continue working, that companies need to think about how do they leverage and how do they leverage the skill sets and the expertise and the wisdom that comes with an aging population. And what we've learned through these series of engagements is the fact that, in fact, many of these global leaders see the value of an older workforce and a multi-generational workforce. They actually see the value of that. And they are implementing a series of policies and practices that are in some cases ageless, which is great, because what they're doing is they're looking at some of these issues across the lifespan. whether it's instituting caregiving policies within the workplace because someone is either caring for a family member and not putting an age limit to that. We know that there's over 53 million caregivers, particularly within the US, and 25% of them are millennials. So those type of policies are key. To add to that is the fact that we have about 28 global leaders that are part of this collaborative who's been sharing insights on a monthly basis, promising practices of how they are managing and fostering their workforce even during this pandemic and what they're thinking about post-COVID-19. And the 28 global companies represent about 1.5 million employees and over $840 billion worth of revenue. And they see the value of creating a workforce that is multi-generational, investing in that workforce, whether that is through a range of policies that are in many ways really ageless, and then also thinking about ways in which they can invest and ensure that people are receiving the necessary skills that they need. Because we're living longer, the model of going to school, graduating, getting married and working in a job for 40, 50 years has changed quite a bit. That, you know, the notion that you just go to school one time has changed because we're living longer. Things are changing so rapidly. And a lot of these global leaders see it and they value it and they really want to support it. So it's not just about simply living longer. I think we all recognize that it's more important, frankly, to live a more healthier and more meaningful life. And what brings you meaning? And that's a question that I think has to be answered at the individual level. But more importantly, I think that employers, private industry, public sector can do a tremendous amount of work to create the ecosystem to help to ensure that people are being able to live a longer and healthier and more meaningful life.
And where do I begin? I think it's just profound, Gene, the work that you and your colleagues are working on at AARP. I mean, we have a front row seat in watching you change the world. But as you describe it today, it just reminds us all in our global audience that this organization, AARP, is helping to truly change the world, in quotes, literally, figuratively. I mean, it's incredible what you're doing. You're setting the tone, you're leading. And so if we were to ask, what are the most important issues to be addressed in order to fully harness the power of that 50+ population? How could we do this while meeting their needs and interests?
Well, thank you so much, George. As I indicated throughout our conversation, when we think about what does it mean to live a life of dignity, purpose, and independence? What does it mean to live a much healthier, longer, and more meaningful life? And I think that we have an opportunity here across us industries and sectors to collaborate in a very meaningful way to create the ecosystem in order to do that. When you look at the 50+ population, particularly within the US, their economic contributions is $8.3 trillion of economic activity. That is significant. Could be its own country, third world's largest country. In addition to that, what I didn't mention is the fact that the 50+ provides a tremendous amount of value that is unpaid, whether it's caregiving for an older adult or a loved one, or caregiving for a grandchild. I was raised, I think I've shared with you, that I was raised by my grandmother for the first 4 years of my life, or the amount of time that they spend volunteering, and as well as their charitable donations. So I think it's critically important, the work that we're doing, particularly as an organization, to disrupt a lot of these negative stereotypes and to really see people as people and to understand that people are living much longer, that they want to be major contributors, that they want to be part of the solution and not the problem, that the 50+ in particular is a huge asset and not a liability, that it's not about decline, it's about living. And I'm sure we all want to live.
You know, Gene, I'm often not at a loss for words, but you described it in a way that I think our global audience will take away so many incredible insights, perspectives, and most importantly, lessons for implementation.
Absolutely.
I think if you heard anything today and during this interview, it's an action plan. It's an action plan. It's an awareness building moment. You have to be aware. You can't just go through this journey without being aware of what is happening around you. And when you then become aware of that, you must take action.
That's exactly right.
Gene Axius, Senior Vice President, Global Thought Leadership, AARP, changing the world, leadership defined. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to Ideagen TV with Microsoft's Gretchen O'Hara, guest host in this series. Gretchen, welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
Well, you know, what an incredible day, what an incredible time. And who would have thought just a few short months ago, we were together on a stage at the Women in Cloud Summit in Seattle at Microsoft. I mean, hard to believe, right?
It is almost surreal. All together physically in one space, and here we are virtually now.
It's really remarkable. And you know, when we were sitting on that stage, we had a very close friend of the planet in terms of healthcare, and that is Mr. BJ Noor, who'll be joining us shortly from Providence St. Joseph Health. But we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and the importance of achieving those goals. It was January. We have a runway of 10 years. Today, we sit 3,513 days from January 1, 2030. Hard to believe, but a lot to accomplish.
It's good that we have BJ to really help lead the way on healthcare. So excited to learn a little bit more.
Well, it's an exciting time, and this is your show, so I'd like to make the intro of Mr. BJ Moore from Providence St. Joseph Health, Chief Information Officer. He spent 26 years at Microsoft before going to Providence St. Joseph to lead its digital transformation. We've known BJ for quite some time, and it's been a lot of fun, really, to partner with BJ and Providence St. Joseph Health as he leverages cloud computing, AI, and his vision for patient experience to advance healthcare. And so we welcome BJ. BJ will be joining us in a moment.
All
BJ,
right.
welcome.
Welcome, BJ. Thanks so much for joining us really in this unique time that we're in. And we had an opportunity, I think George just talked a little bit about, our opportunity to talk together around the transformation in healthcare. And here we are now, in quite a different time. And so, maybe I would love to just, before we just jump right in, get a perspective from you and share with viewers a little bit about, what's the biggest adjustment that you've been going through in terms of, your social isolation and, during this pandemic?
Sure. First, George and Gretchen, thank you for having me on. I always appreciate the partnership. Little known fact, I'm an introvert. That comes as a surprise. So 3 months ago, you would have told me, hey, BJ, there's going to be this COVID thing. You're going to be able to socially isolate. I would have thought that was the best thing ever. Even as an introvert, this has been super, super tough. I realize I get my energy from people at work. And, with Washington and all the states here on the West Coast being locked down, that opportunity to connect with colleagues and peers and partners it's been draining. How my introverted brain is struggling with the isolation. So, yeah, a bit surprising.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. I'm also, and we were talking about before the show, just a person that likes to actually be in the office, likes to connect with people, and being without that. I've been lucky enough to have my family to connect into, but you sort of crave those interconnections, and so I can absolutely understand that perspective, and I think many of our viewers are feeling the same way. So, trying to continue to bring shows like this an opportunity for people to come together and join in the dialogue and the conversation, I think helps us all feel a little bit closer. So, again, thank you, for your time today, which is great.
It really is incredible, because just a few short months ago, the three of us were sitting on that stage at Microsoft in Seattle at the Women in Cloud Summit, and we talked about a whole bunch of different things, but most importantly, talking about a little bit about the transformation of healthcare delivery, BJ. So we're excited to hear from you today in your conversation with Gretchen on her show series as a guest host on Ideagen TV. I'm so excited to hear all of your perspectives today.
Great.
That's fantastic.
I'm excited to share them with you guys.
Well, let's dig in a little bit.
Okay.
So BJ, we had a chance to work together for some time. A good advocate and friend into Ideagen as well, and so thank you for your service on that. But you've been at Providence St. Joseph for about a year and a half now?
That's right.
Okay, year and a half. So a lot of change. You were kind of at the heart of that, at that change. And so maybe just share a little bit of your perspective, what the relationship is with Microsoft, both as a customer, but also as a partner. I think many people don't realize that there is that sort of connected partnership.
Sure. First, as a customer, we surprise, after being at Microsoft for 26 years, really embrace Microsoft 365 and the whole suite there. We were fortuitous enough, a year ago to start moving all of our caregivers, all of our employees, all 130,000 of them to Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365, and thank goodness we did. There's not a day that doesn't go by where somebody here at Providence St. Joseph Health doesn't thank me for that journey, embracing the Microsoft platform. It's been so critical as everybody works from home, and being able to collaborate and do voice and video has just been seamless. So as a customer, it's been great. And as a partner, it's probably, it's been just as great as well, right? On the partnership front, we had the announcement back in July where Providence St. Joseph Health and Microsoft partnered on kind of the hospital of the future, and that's paying off dividends as well. Simple example is the bot that we partnered with Microsoft, back in early March. Your viewers may or may not know, but the first patient in the United States actually came into our health system in Everett in January, and then in March, as we started to see the COVID volumes grow, it was clear to us that people were concerned in the communities, and they were going into the emergency departments and concerned they may have COVID. And so we partnered with Microsoft to come up with a bot that we could put on our website that allowed people to interact and, are my symptoms something I should be concerned about, or not? And so people were able to self-triage and make the decision to stay at home or come into our hospital system. So a simple example, but that partnership paid off. I know I personally use the bot every day. Am I still okay? Should I?
Right. I've used that bot. I mean, if you think of something as simple of that, but how AI has literally transformed the way that you're interacting both with your patients, but also ensuring that they're getting the right patient care and also supporting the broader healthcare system. So it's just it's an incredible example.
Was able to take that across the U.S. I think you guys even took that worldwide. So a partnership that we did, here locally between the two companies that then benefited the U.S. and other countries. So I couldn't be more proud of that partnership and where that went.
I've talked to a lot of customers and partners. We sat on stage together, really before all of this happened, and you talk a lot about the transformation of healthcare. And I think it's never been more relevant of that sort of foresight that you had based on sort of where we all are now in the pandemic. And so you talk about the relationship with Microsoft, you talk about sort of the partnership and some of the examples. How has this helped you transform your business today and what you're facing within your business?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy I use is the 2 months that we've been dealing with the COVID crisis. I feel like we've at least made 12 months of progress on the technology front. How we were able to grow our telehealth business, how we're able to remotely monitor our patients at home, how we're able to connect caregiver to caregiver or caregivers with patients. So technology's been a backbone of all of that. And, we had already been investing with Microsoft, but in COVID, we saw a huge acceleration, and it's at least 12 months of progress we've made in the last 2 months. So obviously the crisis is very tragic and difficult to deal with. But if we're to make lemonade out of lemons here, the capabilities that we built as a health system is well ahead of where we would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And so technology, has been that key enabler.
And it's interesting. You sort of started off saying, the company is now thanking you for sort of seeing and having that vision then, so that you could be in a position to really respond now, and not only respond, to your patients, but give back globally, as you talked about, from a partnership perspective to help all of us, which is just is really incredible. And so, you talked a little bit about, the various solutions that you've been using, maybe transition just slightly into what do you think comes next? So we've been focused so much on response, and, I would love to get your perspective, where you think we are on that. But at some point we have to switch now into recovery, and how do you think about this post-COVID world? What comes next?
Yeah. First, I hope a lot of the things we built, I know a lot of the things we built are going to be durable after COVID. Like I said, the telehealth business, just an example of where that went. I mean, before COVID, we were seeing about 50 patients a day via teleconsult. We were able to grow that business to 10,000 visits a day. That's something I'd like to see stick with us post-COVID. It's able to serve the communities. It's more convenient. It's more scalable. We were able to monitor patients remotely. At one point in time, we had 1,000 COVID patients that we'd sent home when we were managing remotely. I think that's something that's durable for not just COVID, but for other things. It could be post-surgery, it could be for the flu, it could be other ways to monitor people at home, but use technology. In this case, it was an oxygen sensor on somebody's finger, temperature that we'd ask them to take a couple of days, that would get uploaded to the cloud. And then, a very small set of caregivers were able to monitor, thousands of patients. So I'd like to see, that be durable. And then another thing is, we've talked about it before. I think we talked about it in January. We always throw around technology terms like Internet of Things and big data, machine learning and AI, and it's like this alphabet soup of technology. But where I think we can go in this post-COVID world is getting people to take an IoT device like a thermometer, something that simple. So Kirkland is, where this all started in the United States.
That's right.
We had people in Kirkland that were taking their temperature every day, and that was automatically being loaded into the cloud. We could have, with big data models, seen, okay, the baseline is normally 10 people a day in Kirkland have the fever. Why are fevers slowly getting more prevalent in Kirkland? So, we could have proactively seen that maybe there was something happening in our community. So I think this alphabet soup of technology can become real, and IoT, these medical devices going to the cloud and then using big data and ML, machine learning to manage that, I think can be a real thing. So excited to see the future post-COVID.
It is really exciting. I mean, you mentioned previously when we talked, some of the barriers of AI, and you talked about a little bit of the technology soup and how really to apply it, and actually even, security and, just sort of fear factor. And I think what you're explaining now is making, real solutions, real capabilities that are saving lives and helping improve patient care. I think it makes it more appetizing for people that didn't know what it could do in the past.
I mean, necessity can be the mother of invention. I think if you talk to somebody in January about doing a teleconsult, they would have been like, I prefer to come in. Like I've come in and seen the doctor, and during the COVID crisis, the only option was telehealth. And the feedback we get from nurses and doctors and patients is, wow, this was actually fantastic. Like, this is more convenient. I was able to get the diagnosis. I was able to build the confidence. I didn't have to drive in and wait in the waiting room and fill out all the paperwork. It was all electronic. So yeah, I think there was a change management aspect of it. And I think COVID has helped us through that. And I think that's a muscle that will stick in this post-COVID world.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that change management. You talked about that a little bit, and last time we had the conversation, and I think we can't overestimate how hard that might be in an organization. You are the technologist and the visionary here, but you have to sort of continue to build change management in your own organization and actually to your patients or customers they're taking advantage of that, and that is no small feat. So I think it's been incredible to see the sort of vision technology and then into solution being served up so people can see that. Is there any on that just last sort of change management component, just to throw you a little bit, but do you see any last blockers as we come out on the other side of this, or do you feel like people have now lived it and when you live it and you use it, you go forward?
Yeah, I mean, as far as remote workers, I feel like in January, if I talked to folks about working remotely, they would have been pushed back. I think people have embraced that. I think telehealth, people would have pushed back. I think that'll be embraced. I think maybe things that we still have the change management on is that concept of sharing my personal health data. Am I comfortable taking my temperature every day and loading that into the cloud? What is the security and privacy around that? Right. I think that's a change management curve we haven't gone through yet.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping, it was such an abstract concept before COVID. It just sounded like a technologist talking about technology.
Right.
And now when you talk about it in a practical sense that, maybe we could have seen this in November, December, and we could have taken, precautions back then. I think maybe individuals or communities will realize, okay, there's a huge value add from sharing this data. And so
no question.
We'll have to go through the change management, but now the value proposition is more obvious.
It's more obvious. And I think, going back to summarizing, I think so well, which is sort of transforming this alphabet soup of just technology for technology's sake into real life-saving practicality, cost benefits, security and so forth. I think people are through a maturity curve willing to they see the benefits on the other side, and they realize that all of the innovation and change management for both your company and patients is starting to pay off. So really appreciate your perspective today and your time. I know you are being sought after and asked in a very, very busy time. We're all working a little bit around the clock.
Never work harder.
I think that is the common answer. And so, BJ, I just taking a little bit of time to share with our viewers your perspective. And as you mentioned, really in the heart of where COVID started, that leadership in healthcare has been incredible. So thank you so much. I do want to share also just a couple other things, with our viewers in addition to what's coming up. One of the things that are very near and dear to my heart is our announcements that we made around AI for health, which is actually some areas that the BJ was talking about in terms of that strategic partnership. And so in January, we really pivoted our AI for health really to focus on COVID-19 related areas, specifically around giving, investment and dedicated joint partnership such as yours to help with both data insights, to help with treatment diagnostics, allocation, and resources. And these are all the things that then, Providence St. Joseph's has then brought to life. And we really see that, come to bear, in addition to areas that we're seeing, in partnership with CDC and scientific research, and then helping out with the big data that you talked about and dissemination of information, because we're all trying to understand the data and the statistics and what's happening there. The other thing that I'd love to just finalize to the viewers here today is really what is coming up around our developer conference with Build. So we've talked a little bit about the technology and practical application, but we're announcing our Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare in strong partnership with partners such as Providence. And this is really about bringing, customers and partners together. We talked a lot about enriching patient engagement and used some examples today. We talked about connecting caregivers and teams and doing some of the remote monitoring, and then really helping with collaboration, decision-making, operational efficiencies to just make healthcare smarter and more impactful for all of us. And so those are things to keep an eye out for that I think BJ has brought to light in an incredible way. And so, just feel free to go out and take a look at the Developer Conference. Join the Healthcare Industry Summit as well, and we'll make sure that you have availability to register at Microsoft.com/healthcare summit. And take a chance if you're interested in what we're doing from technology to practical implementation. You'll definitely want to be able to tune in for that as well. So once again, thank you for joining us today. BJ, thank you for your time and participation, dedication into this field and your vision. Thank you all to the viewers for tuning in to Ideagen TV powered by Azure, and look forward to talking with you again next month. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
John, what an amazing summit this has been. We've had so many great guests with really inspiring talks. Thank you to all of our participants and viewers here at the Global Innovation 2030 Digital Summit.
Absolutely, Cooper. I couldn't agree more. We've heard some really insightful and inspiring things today. And now, to close it out, I would like to introduce Dr. Siddhant Gupta, the chairman of the Ideagen Advisory Board. Dr. Gupta, welcome.
Thank you, both of you. Absolutely an amazing digital summit, a first for Ideagen. The pandemic, as probably you all know, threw a little wrench in all of our plans. But something I've noticed with the pandemic is the silver lining, is we all came together. You can see this all across different parts of the government, public, private sector. Folks came together to tackle this global pandemic, and we are putting a really strong fight. And that gives me the context for claiming and asserting that we have no excuse not to go after and solve some of the more bigger problems, and particularly focus on SDGs. We've shown that we can come together and work on these problems. So, I encourage all of the Ideagen community to keep that in mind. The way I think about it is, more than ever before, it is clear that we all have a responsibility to be an active and intentional participant in creating an inclusive and diverse environment. And empathy plays a key role there. It starts with our relationships. It starts with our relationship with colleagues at home. And with those guiding principles and what we saw with the pandemic, us coming together, I think we can work together as a single human population to uplift everyone out of poverty, create equality, provide equity, and tackle some of the vexing sustainable development goals for 2030. We only have 10 years, but I think that's enough time given how impressive they've been. And in closing, I wanted to highlight that, especially for our viewers, that we'll have 17 days of sustainability presented by Ideagen sometime in July, where we'll double-click in each of the sustainable goals. We'll have some great content, talks and speakers where we go in-depth into each of the sustainable goals. And with that, I would like to close the summit. And thank you so much for watching our first ever digital summit. Thank you.